Just yeah, that's not an problem. I was working we would have like food that I brought they just sitting there, they enjoy keep them in the background. They've been on with emotions.
All right, good morning, councils, interested parties. We're back on the record, the matter of the state. Oh, who's not here? I'll take care of it. In the matter of the state of Georgia versus Khalif Adams et al. In 22 SC 183572. Good morning, Mr. Stillwell, Mr. Botts, and where's Mr. Sharp? He's on the way. Okay, all right. We'll account for him when he gets here. Mr. Williams, Mr. Steele, good morning. Good morning, Your Honor. Mr. Kendrick and Mr. Weinstein, good morning. Good morning. All right, Mr. Huey and Mr. Matthews Sr., good morning, gentlemen. All right, Mr. Nichols and Mr. Garner, good morning, sir. And Mr. Ryan and Misty Williams, good morning, madam. All right. In the state, Mr. Carlson, Mr. Floyd, Ms. Love, Ms. Hilton, and once again in the cheap seats, Brown and Messer, and Mr. Uhelski. Good morning, Your Honor. Okay, all right. Good morning, all. Okay, let me go ahead and like I said, when we recessed last night, courts had an opportunity to ponder the issues that were presented yesterday in terms of the admission of lyrics or the exclusion thereof. So to that extent, the court has considered the state's motion in limine to admit evidence of lyrics, the state's supplemental motion in limine to admit evidence of lyrics at trial, the state's amended particularized motion in limine to admit evidence of lyrics at trial, the opposition to the state's second supplemental, and motion in limine to admit evidence of lyrics at trial filed by, and on behalf of Mr. Kendrick, and argued by Mr. Weinstein, as well as Jeffrey Williams' motion in limine number 2, 1, and 2 to motion to strike, as well as Mr. Shart's oral motion, and the court will also consider it for any other lyrics that may be sought to be admissible in the trial of this matter. Specifically, I have considered the arguments of the state as well as the arguments of the defense. I'll kind of go through those in just a second. The state has argued that this particular gang lyrics or evidence is admissible for several reasons. One, to show actus reus or mens rea, or other offenses under 16-14-4, 16-15-4, or 24-8-801D2 alpha, 28-8-801D2 bravo, 24-8-801D2 echo, and 24-8-804 B3, specifically, as well as 16-15-3, 16-15-9 for those particular relevant purposes. The court is well aware that there are several gatekeeping functions that the court must perform in determining logical relevance under 401, presumptive admissibility under 402, and legal relevance under 403. The defense has argued that use of these particular, the admission and use of lyrics, poetry, or artistry against Mr. Williams or any of the other named defendants as appropriate in this upcoming trial would be a constitutional violation, abuse of discretion, too prejudicial and unconstitutional based on the provisions of the U.S. Constitution as well as the Georgia Constitution, and that moreover, using these lyrics, poetry, artistry, speech against Mr. Williams and others would be racist and discriminatory because the jury would be poisoned, prejudiced by these lyrics, poetry, artistry, speech as the same as unlawful character assassination. The defense has asked me to exclude or these particular lyrics, poetry, words, speech, artistry from the indictment and exclusion from testimony and evidence pursuant to 24-4-401, 24-4-402, 25-4-403, and 24-4-404A, as well as the constitutional provisions as set forth in the Georgia and U.S. constitutions. Mr. Williams, as well as others, have asked this court to further suppress any video, photographs, posts, or images that deal with these particular lyrics, words, speech, poetry, artistry, to be excluded from trial as well in total, and that these videos are protected speech as articulated by the same aforementioned provisions of the Georgia as well as U.S. Constitution. And as I mentioned, these arguments the court's going to apply as to all parties, not just the ones that argued yesterday, Mr. Steele, Mr. Sharp, and Mr. Weinstein. The court also, in considering this particular ruling, considered under the provisions of 24-1-104, which is the conditional admissibility or screening determination that this court may make. And I'll cite from our code, preliminary questions concerning the qualifications of a person to be a witness, the existence of a privilege, or the admissibility of evidence shall be determined by the court subject to the revisions of the subsection B of this, and that's on relevancy, depends on the fulfillment of a condition of fact. Court shall admit it upon or subject to the introduction of evidence sufficient to support a finding fulfillment of the condition. So if I have to look at A before I can get to B, but it also mentions that subject to the revisions of subsection B of this code section, in making this determination, the court shall not be bound by the rules of evidence, except those as respect to privileges. Preliminary questions shall be resolved by preponderance of the evidence standard. And then B covers the relevancy of a condition of fact So in this particular circumstance, the court's just making a preliminary admissibility determination. Of course, anything that the court may rule upon at this point in time will be subject to a complete foundation being met and may be subject to other additional objections. But the court has considered, in terms of 104, states 1 through 20, as well as defendants 1 through 4. Mr. Weinstein, thank you. We got the PowerPoint you presented yesterday. We also have D2, D3, which is, I believe, the drive, and D4 presented by Mr. Steele, and D4, which was the chart that Mr. Steele circulated for the courts and parties' consideration. So I've considered that universe of conditionally admissible evidence for my consideration on the ruling, on this particular ruling. The court has also further considered in making this ruling the commonality of specific lyrics as they relate to the issues of mens rea and actus reus. Also, the court has also considered that depending upon the proof presented in this case, and that YSL, its and testimony that may be relevant of the gang's organization and or strength would be relevant. The court has also considered that these particular statements are being offered to show the elements of the offenses and not the threat or conduct is not being prosecuted, but these particular lyrics can be associated with different things that the court mentioned that the state has proffered in States 19. As it pertains to the First Amendment assertions raised by Mr. Steele and Mr. Weinstein and Mr. Sharp under the First Amendment, the court has in fact considered Carpenter among other cases that were cited for the court's consideration yesterday, and that these lyrics, that rap lyrics are relevant, and they must, that the court must conduct a 403 balancing test, which it shall. In terms of the First Amendment analysis that Mr. Steele suggested I needed to conduct, I do have to conduct that, and I have conducted that in looking at the use of the statement, or is it being admitted for a proper purpose? I know that Mr. Steele argued very eloquently yesterday about it being character or improper character, propensity. It's not being admitted for improper characters that would fall under, the court would certainly screen it under certain other evidence standards. And the propensity argument that was made yesterday, this, as mentioned by the state, this evidence is not being admitted saying that Mr. Williams and any others did these things before, so they do them again. So I'm dissuaded as to the propensity argument. As it pertains to the issue of mental state, argued under 27-7-404B, expert witnesses, if qualified, may draw conclusions about intent as long as they don't state that this is the defendant's intent. So to Mr. Matthews, and your continued argument about that, and Mr. Steele as well, as long as those experts do not cross that particular line, those particular things would be relevant. I've also considered United States versus Smith at 918 F3rd 825, that assuming a foundation can be laid, certainly, and if it's within this can of expert testimony, that certain terms or technology or terms and or symbols or signs may be appropriate and relevant, giving meaning to gang determination. And then, so for those particular reasons set forth therein, the court is going to admit for the limited purpose thus far, the state's request to apply the evidence statute is written. I'm going to conditionally admit particularized lyrics, and those lyrics are found within States 18. There's 17 sets of lyrics. They're from pages 41 through 49 of States 18, 41 through 41 through 49 of States 18, submitted for the court's consideration yesterday. Those specific statements, the court will admit, I'll conditionally admit those pending lyrics, depending upon or subject to a foundation that is properly laid by the state or the proponent that seeks to admit that evidence. And to that extent, I have also considered the Taylor, White, Torres, and the Commonwealth versus Knox cases, and I find this to be that the conditional admission of these particular lyrics are proper. I would just ask the state, or just remind the state, if any other lyrics are sought to be admitted, that I'd have to go through this same analysis, and if you would do so prior to us putting a jury in the box, that would certainly be helpful. And I'm going to deny the defense's motions at this point in time as to the reasons that they allege. And I'll note that there'll be a continuing objection as to those. Mr. Carlson, could you or you and Mr. Floyd prepare a suitable order for my signature if you would float that to your colleagues across the way? And
Well, Mr. Floyd and I are prepared to, Your Honor. May I inquire of the court as to one scheduling matter?
yeah, sure.
We have, Mr. Floyd's unavailable next week, so could we get this order to you by, say, the 22nd? That Wednesday before Thanksgiving, we would be prepared to even work through the.
You'd be the only person here then, okay?
Right, I understood.
Because I don't plan on being here that day. Could you get it done by the 20th, sir? 20th or 21st?
Yes, Your Honor. Yes, Mr. Floyd signaling.
Okay, Mr. Floyd, what date for you, sir? Will work, 20th?
That's it. I'll make the 20th.
Okay, all right. So
Thank you.
that order just needs to be circulated and filed for our consideration by the 20th, okay? All right,
Understood, Your Honor.
okay, all right.
Your Honor, can I ask a question?
Even if I tell you no, you're still gonna ask it anyways, Mr. Steele, so go right ahead anyway. No, go ahead, sir. What does he want to ask me?
Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Happy holidays, everyone. I asked the court, but it's also asking Carlson, Mr. Floyd, would you be good enough to include the exact lyrics that you had in States 18 in the order, just so it's for the ease of us later to use?
Yes, that would be appropriate, Mr. Floyd. Because I want to make sure I got those. And I believe that there are 17 sets or 17 lyrics that are applicable between pages 41 through 49. Those are the ones that I'm going to preliminarily admit.
Understood, Your Honor.
Okay.
And we planned on being specific in the order.
Okay, all right.
And Your Honor, just for clarification of the record as to the opinion evidence, it's 704B is the rule the court was
Yes.
citing.
Yes,
Thank you.
yes, sir. Yes. Okay. All right, gentlemen, unless there's anything else that pertains to this particular, and ladies, and this particular motion, I'm going to move on to some other things. Christina, let me make sure I've got everything here. Oh, D3 was rap on trial, Miss Weaver. Yeah, so I believe we have, do you have a copy of that up here? Okay, you do? Okay, all right. Okay. All right, then we can turn to, at this point in time, Ms. Hilton and Ms. Love, ladies, to the motions, Robert, in terms of firearms, and Mr. Bernini and the other scientists you have today.
Okay.
Your Honor, those witnesses are coming in. I mean, Mr. Floyd, I do.
You certainly may, sir,
Thank you, Your Honor.
unless you have any other business before me at this time. Okay.
We'll be getting to work, Judge.
Okay.
Okay.
Corey, just get clean copies because I think I wrote on Mr. Stevens. Okay. I wrote on that. I'm sorry.
You inviting the West? You inviting the You good? You good? Good. say. I was gonna say. Well, you have to in this one. Judge, you ready? You ready?
I haven't called him in yet,
I got that.
but I will. Just give me a second.
James Berry.
Yeah.
I know you spelled it. B-R-N-I.
Okay, you all are ready at this point in time, Mr. Bierney? Agent Bierney, okay, all right. We can call him Agent Bierney at this point, okay? All right, thank you. Agent Bierney, good morning, sir. Sir, if you could please approach the witness stand. Once you get there, be so kind to turn and face Deputy Ingram, be sworn as a witness before you sit down.
Yes, sir.
Raise your right hand. You swear firm testimony you give the truth, whole truth, nothing but the truth.
I do.
I see you. I got it. State and spell your first and last name for the course, please.
Yeah, first name is James, last name is Bernie, B-E-R-N-I.
And Agent Bernie, where are you employed?
I'm a special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
And how long have you been with the Federal Bureau of Investigation?
Going on 16 years.
And can you tell the court, what do you do currently for the Federal Bureau of Investigation?
Yeah, I'm part of the FBI's CAST team, C-A-S-T.
And how long have you been with the CAS team?
I've been with them since 2015 and full-time with them since January of 2019.
Agent Bierney, what does CAST mean, sir?
CAST stands for Cellular Analysis Survey Team.
Okay, thank you, sir.
And you said you were with them part-time in 2015. If you could tell the jury a little bit about your 16 years at the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
Yeah, so I came into the FBI in 2007, spent the first 10 years approximately up in Minneapolis working violent gang cases as part of the Minneapolis Safe Streets Violent Gang Task Force. So working gun cases, drug cases, violent crime cases, and then started doing CAST part-time in 2015. Got certified as a CAST member in 2016, excuse me, and then transitioned over to full-time CAST, meaning that's all I do is cell phone analysis in January of 2019.
Okay. And we're going to get to more detail about the CAS. Prior to working at the FBI, tell the court a little about what you did prior to working or joining the FBI.
Yeah, I spent 10 years active duty, United States Army. The last 6 years, I worked military intelligence, specifically at the National Security Agency, or NSA, where my job was to track Department of Defense high-value targets using their communication devices like cell phones, satellite phones, things like that.
And did you, while in the Army, did you receive any type of training to do your job with the Army?
I did, specifically about a year's worth of training from National Security Agency and then some other private contractors on, radio wave theory, radio wave communications, things like that.
Okay. And did you go to college?
I did.
Where did you go?
I graduated from Auburn University in 1998 with a criminal justice degree.
Now we are going to transition into CAS. You told us that CAS is the cellular analyst survey team. If you can tell the core about the background of a typical CAS agent.
Yeah, so CAST, again, Cellular Analysis Survey Team. It's a team stood up in 2009 by the FBI once the FBI noticed an increased use in cell phone records in criminal trials. So CAST team members like myself specialize in historical and active cell phone mapping and tracking of cell phones and social media devices. So typical background, most CAST agents have been lead investigators or case agents for multiple years. Most of us have an extensive background working violent crime matters, again, like homicides, robberies, things like that.
And do you have to receive training to become a member of the CAS team?
We do. We receive over 400 hours of specialized training from both private and government contractors, again, in things like radio wave theory. How does a radio wave move through space? We also receive training from cell phone manufacturers. So we bring in Apple, Samsung, LG, and they talk to us about how does the device work, the device being the cell phone, how does it work in the network? But probably some of the most relevant training we receive is from the cell phone providers themselves, meaning T-Mobile, Verizon, AT&T. They come in and they'll teach us how does their network work from the time that you place or receive a phone call till that call is terminated, what happens on the network, and how is that interactions recorded in their records, and then how would you use their records to find or track a device historically.
And have you been trained with all the providers that you just named?
Yeah, both initially in training in 2016, but we also meet with the providers annually and get recertified in our gear, and also get updates from all the major providers every year on, when is 5G voice going to be everywhere? When is 3G going away? Are there any changes that we might see? So that way we have the most up-to-date and current information to discuss at trials and to use for our analysis.
And earlier you said that in 2015, you got your certification and then you became full-time. What did you have to do in order to get a CAS certification? So
the CAS certification was in 2016. I just started with the unit in 2015, going through all of their training. The training, again, is about 400 hours of training, and it culminates in two-week courses, so a total of 4 weeks at the end. And that's where we get all the providers to come in and teach us about that. We also get a crash course in cell phone architecture from Florida Institute of Technology. And then we do some testimony training. And then there is a hands-on and a written test in which you have to score 80 or above on both to get certified. And
did you pass your examination?
I did.
Now, after having your initial certification, do you continue to get additional training? You said with the cell phone companies, they'll come in every year. Do you get any other additional training outside of what we already discussed?
We do. We try and meet with other folks within the industry. We just received training from Life 360 a couple months ago. We received training from Snapchat. So again, any social media or telecommunication partners that we can develop a relationship with, we'll conduct training with them as often as we can.
Okay. And have you had the occasion to provide training to others in the area of cellular analysis?
I have. I'm part of CAS training cadre. So I've taught the basic course, which is our introduction course. It's a 2-day course that we teach to law enforcement. And that is, what records are available, how to obtain records via search warrant and other means, and then how to read those records and map those records so that you can, determine the location of the device in a general area. So I've taught that, I think 13 or 14 different times in 8 different states. I've also conducted, taught at our advanced course, the CAST advanced course, which is the next level up. That's a 4-day training for folks that continue within our CAST certification. I've also conducted training at International Homicide Investigators course. I've also been a guest speaker on CAST and cellular analysis in London, England. And I've done some CAST work as well in Mexico, Ukraine, and the Caribbean.
Okay. If you could tell the court, Rico, what is historical cell detail analysis?
Yeah, so by law, all the service providers have to keep track of every mobile device on their network. And they do this in what's called call detail records, or CDRs for short. Think of the CDR as like your old school phone bill when we used to get like a paper copy of that, right? It would have our number, the other number associated with our call or text, the date and time, the duration in seconds, be it a 30-second or 60-second call. But then there's also information relevant to the providers and to law enforcement, and that is the cell phone tower and sector or side of the tower that's used for each of those calls, texts, or data sessions. In addition to the call detail list, the providers also have to keep track of all cell phone towers in their network in the United States, and they do this in what's called the tower list. And so that will have a street address or a latitude, longitude spot on the earth of where every cell phone tower is, and then the makeup of its sectors or sides. And that tower list is uniquely numbered, meaning in the T-Mobile network, if we're looking at T-Mobile tower 1, 2, 3, there's only one tower labeled 1, 2, 3 in their entire network. So it's like a fingerprint within their network. So historical call detail analysis is basically taking the call detail records when an activity occurred, like a call, putting that together with the tower list, the where. And by putting those two things together, we can get a general location of where a device is when it had an activity, like a call, on the network.
Okay. And approximately how many times have you performed historical call detail analysis?
But this has been my full-time job since January of 2018. So probably 1,200 times at least in various cases.
Okay. And you said in various cases, generally what type of cases have you had the occasion to do some historical call detail analysis?
Yeah, most of them are violent crime cases, homicides, kidnappings. But I also have used this in runaways, suicidal individuals. Anytime that you need to locate a device, you can use this technique. I'm also in charge of or handling all the Amber Alerts for Georgia, Alabama, and the Panhandle of Florida. So anytime a missing kid gets reported, CAST, in particular me for Georgia or Alabama, handles the cellular analysis portion.
Now you are a special agent with the FBI. Are there other agencies that can request your services?
Yeah, so we assist any local, state, federal law enforcement partners. Again, I've also done some overseas cellular analysis cases as they've come up and been requested.
In your experience in doing CAS for the last couple of years, have you ever had the occasion where, or you've conducted an analysis where a person accused of a crime has been eliminated or cleared as a result of your findings?
Yeah, absolutely. So I do a lot of analysis, obviously, for departments in Georgia and Alabama. And a lot of times they'll send me the cell phone records for an individual and say, hey, this is our main suspect. Let's just say in this homicide case, he says that he was in Florida, let's say. And it's quite often where I'll review the records and help certify someone's alibi in a different part, and therefore clearing them as a potential suspect in a particular case.
And have you testified as an expert, specifically under the Dauber standard previously?
I have.
Where?
Let's see, Georgia, Alabama, Florida, North Carolina, Virginia, South Dakota, Minneapolis or Minnesota, Tennessee. I think that's it.
Okay. And have you also testified as an expert in state court?
I have.
Okay. And in federal court, how many times have you been qualified as an expert?
In both state and federal? Yeah, I think 66 times.
Okay. And everything that we just discussed so far, is that contained within your CV?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Permission to approach?
You may, madam.
Agent Byrne, I'm going to show you I've shown you what's been marked as Stacy exhibit number 1 that I've shown to opposing counsel. Do you recognize Stacy exhibit number 1?
I do.
And how do you recognize Stacy exhibit number 1?
This is a copy of my latest CV.
Okay. And is that a fair and accurate depiction of your latest CV?
It is.
And does that CV contain generally what we just discussed about your training and experience in your education?
Yes, ma'am.
Your Honor, this time to say what I tender Stacy exhibit number 1 into evidence.
Any objection to S1 for purpose of motion?
Not for purpose.
S1's admitted.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, we've talked about kind of what historical call detail analysis is. If you can tell the court, when you receive a request to do historical call data analysis, if you can tell the court what is the methodology that you use in order to conduct that analysis.
Yeah, again, it's taking of the call detail records or the records for the phone and putting that together with the tower list. And by doing that, again, we can see the activities on the call detail list, when a calls, texts, data sessions were made, and we can see where those were made based on the tower list locations of the towers and sectors. And so that's basically the methodology of historical call detail analysis.
And are you able to tell exactly where a phone is or a general area?
Just a general area.
And your analysis, is that analysis or methodology generally accepted in this particular area of expertise?
It is.
Are there any papers or articles supporting the analysis that you utilize?
There are.
If you could tell us about it.
Yeah, so there's this first is a scientific working group on digital evidence. I think it was produced in 2014. That specifies, again, historical call detail analysis as a reliable technique or methodology used. More recently, there was an article put out by the Institute of Electronics and Electrical Engineers, the IEEE. I believe that report was in 2020 or early 2021. And again, it also stated in there that historical call detail analysis was an accurate way of depicting a general area for where a phone was.
And when you conduct your analysis, are your analysis peer reviewed?
They are.
Why is that?
Yes, so the peer review process is basically I create my reports using the methodology discussed, and then I send the same records and my report to another CAS certified individual who will then create a report and then compare his report against my report to make sure that there was no fundamental errors, you know, maybe transcribing a 6 and a 9 or things like that. So that way we're presenting verifiable and repeatable facts during our trial testimony or using that in our analysis.
And prior to the peer review, do you have just a draft report prior to your peer review?
I do. I create a draft report, which then we use to go over with the district attorneys or whoever requested the report to verify that the time period that I analyzed is what they need for trial. It's not maybe too voluminous, and we're focusing on the facts that we need. If there's any other key locations, we may add, you know, a location of interest that just came up during, you know, the investigation or whatever. And then once the report has been, you know, reviewed by myself and the requester, at that point, then the report will be sent for peer review and finalization.
Specifically as it relates to case 22 SC 183572, were you asked to analyze phone records in various incidents associated with this case?
I was.
And specifically, when doing that request, were you able to conduct any cell phone analysis?
I was.
Right. How many final reports did you generate so far?
I think 3.
And then is there a draft report that's still pending?
There is.
All right. And as it relates to the 3 final reports that have been drafted or completed, did you follow the same methodology that we just discussed earlier?
Yes, ma'am. In addition to having them peer reviewed.
Yes. Permission to approach. And were you able to, for the 3 that have a final report, were you able to, I guess, produce a report in those cases?
Yes, ma'am.
You've taken about 4 minutes already, Mr. Matthews. Come on, let's go.
Thank you. Permission to approach, Your Honor?
You may.
Thank you. I'm showing you what's been marked as, State's Exhibit 2, 3, and 4. Do you recognize State's Exhibit 2, 3, and 4?
I do.
And how do you recognize State's Exhibit 2, 3, and 4?
These are printouts of my 3 final analysis.
And specifically, were you asked to do an analysis and in October 12, 2020 armed robbery?
I was.
Or 2021 armed robbery, excuse me. Is that State's Exhibit number 2?
October 12th, 2021.
Yes. And then were you asked to do another analysis for an October 1st, 2020 armed robbery?
That's correct.
And then last, were you asked to do an analysis in a March 14th, 2022 homicide?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. And again, were you able to do an analysis based on cell phone records in the same method that we just spoke of earlier?
Yes, ma'am.
And were you able to complete a report that was peer reviewed?
Yes, 3 separate ones.
All right. At this time, for the purposes of this hearing, the state would like to tender State's Exhibit 2, 3, and 4 into evidence.
Any objection at this point in time? All right, they're admitted, states 2, 3, and 4 are admitted for purposes of this hearing.
Thank you, Your Honor. And now, were you asked to do some cell phone analysis on a homicide from January 10th, 2015?
I was.
And were you provided particular records in order to conduct that analysis?
Yes, ma'am.
Currently, have you done a finalized report of that analysis?
I have not.
And why not?
Well, again, as previously discussed, in between the draft and the final version is when we discuss the time period, the locations in the report, and making sure that all relevant information needed for trial is there. But again, also to tailor it to make sure it's not too voluminous or too narrow and focused.
And in order to have that continued conversation, if there are more slides needed or less, will you use the same methodology as far as the plotting of cell phone records in order to finalize this report?
Yes, ma'am, the exact same.
Okay. And will anything change outside of maybe moving the time slides from some of the other information contained in the report?
No, ma'am.
And right now, that's a draft that has not been peer reviewed as of yet.
It has not.
Okay. But it will go to peer review.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Your Honor, may I approach?
May.
Yes. I just showed you what's marked as State's Exhibit number 5. Do you recognize it?
I do.
And how do you recognize it?
Again, this is a printout of the draft analysis for a January 10th, 2015 incident I was asked to analyze.
Okay. And again, did you do the same analysis as we just previously discussed?
Yes, ma'am. Same methodology used in this report as in the 3 peer-reviewed reports.
Your Honor, this time, for the purposes of this hearing, the state would like to tender State's Exhibit number 5 into evidence.
Any objection, states 5?
No, I don't have an objection, it is a draft, that's what they
Okay, all right. I'll admit it at this point in time for the purposes of this hearing.
Your Honor, I have no further questions at this time.
Are you asking for Mr. Bellini to be designated as any type of expert matter?
I am, but I was going to wait till if there was a voir dire. But Your Honor, this time to say, would like to tender Agent Barney as an expert in historical call detail analysis and cellular technology under the standard in Daubert.
You said there's expert in area of historical call detail what?
Detail analysis and cellular technology.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Cross, anybody? All right, Mr. Seal.
Good morning, sir.
Hey, good morning, sir.
Have you ever been not accepted as an expert in the field of, for which the Honorable Chief Judge Glanville is thinking about deciding whether to qualify you today?
No, I do not believe so, no.
Okay. And when, on this case, did you first have contact, or your teammates, I don't know how it, really works, to get involved in the analysis? And I'm really speaking, you could speak to anyone you want, but I'm really focused on the last exhibit. So I'm assuming it's exhibit 4, but I may be wrong on the number.
The draft one?
The draft one.
Yeah, 5.
Okay, thanks.
This was at the same time as all the others.
Okay.
So I don't recall a specific date of when the request came over. It has been, it's been a while. I would say probably a year, maybe, just my recollection. I don't have the exact date.
When did you complete the draft report in Stage 5?
Well, this draft report as it is, I believe this is my second draft of this. And again, it's, it's a process. Once I have the request, I get the records, I produce a draft. And then at that point, there's discussion to make sure with the requestor to make sure that I'm covering all of the relevant information needed for their trial or their whatever, to include locations. So that there was an initial draft put out, and then there was some discussions about maybe needing some more time, or could we look at, I think we added the trip or an additional phone trip down to Miami, or the trip that was added, the analysis was added, and then this draft was produced. And then there's, some discussion ongoing as to, do we have everything needed as far as the phones analyzed, the time periods, and then any key locations going on right now.
And who is the requestor in this case, if you know specifically?
Miss Love.
Okay.
For this specific case. So the case came in together as one lump case, but then I've been speaking to Miss Love in particular about this one.
And that goes back over a year? Is that your memory or further, or your?
Yeah, I think the initial request was over a year ago.
When was the initial draft report?
Shortly thereafter. I might have taken a month to put it together based on, how busy I was at the time. Again, I don't recall, and I don't have a date on these drafts. So
In year 2022, it sounds like the end of that year. Best estimate.
I think that's fair. Yes.
All right. What records specifically were you given totally to do State's Exhibit number 5, the original draft, as well as the current draft? And if they change over time, please just let us all know.
Yeah. So I was given cell phone records for a number of devices, and I can't recall off the top of my head the total number, for the whole case, meaning the 3 completed analyses and then this one. And then it was decided to break them up into different analysis. And so as far as what records were provided, we can see in my analysis, there's a number of phones, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 for the draft analysis, 10 different phones. So that would be call detail records from each of those devices, tower lists associated. So anything that came back to the requester after a search warrant was served for each of these numbers at the time of the request.
I want to talk about that for a minute. Were you given what came back pursuant to a subpoena or a search warrant, court order? The provider?
Not directly to me from the provider. So it typically goes to the requester, whoever got the search warrant in that office. And then those records are sent to me afterwards.
Do you have and I don't know what the right term is, but I call it a legend or the key on whether they're using UTC time or Greenwich time, or you have all that?
Yeah, that's included in the return. But then it's also included just in our training.
Okay. You didn't provide that to the state with the draft report, did you?
The key?
Yeah.
No, that would be part of the documents that come from the provider after the search warrant. There should be like a explanation sheet, I think is what they call it.
Sure, otherwise they don't really make sense. You need their legend or whatever the key.
Right. To someone who hasn't reviewed them before, they would need the key in order to show what time zones they're in or what columns are the towers, which ones are the sectors, things like that. Yes.
When you do you get feedback, I don't know what the right word is, but on the draft report before you send it for what you call peer review, do you ever meet with somebody like me who represents somebody who has the phone number that one of the numbers you're targeting?
I have.
Okay. How do we do that if that's an appropriate question for today's hearing? Just contact you?
I would imagine it's an appropriate question. Yeah, you just contact me. My information is on my CV. The best way is to email me first. I'm not in the office very often. I do a lot of travel. So if you email me, my email address, I'm pretty sure it is on here. Actually, it may not be on here. If not, you could get my email address through the attorney's office, and then email me and we can set up a time to do a telephone review of any of the things contained in this report or in any of the reports.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. Were there some records you were given that were omitted? And when I say omitted, intentionally not put on your draft report of number 5?
No.
Any phone records?
I mean, not. So I received a bunch of phone records, and I think records for different phone numbers more than that were included on the report here. So this report was tailored to, let's just say, and don't hold me to the exact number. Let's just say I was given 25 numbers. This report counts 3, 6, 9, 10 numbers. So they may have said, hey, for this incident, we're only interested in these 10 numbers.
Okay, so you took instruction from the requester, who's the prosecutor's office,
in which phone numbers they wanted reviewed for each of the incidents.
even though you had more documentation.
Yeah, I may have additional phones that might have records during this time period that weren't reviewed for this particular one.
Now, in your training and experience, I heard you talk about the fact that there are sectors. And
Yes, sir.
Is that alpha, beta, gamma? Is that correct?
Yeah,
Okay.
correct.
And on your report, I noticed that you have it like in a perfect circle with perfect 60 degrees starting at the the top, and I really don't know what degrees those are. I'm assuming, I could assume, but out of the 360, it's split into 180 over to 60, and then 60 to 120, and then the third one would be the balance. Is that how you did it?
Correct. So in the United States, approximately 90, it changes a little bit, 94 to 95% of all cell phone towers in the United States are what's called 3-sectored towers. So they take the one pole and they divide that pole into 3 equal segments. And so by doing that, you take a full circle, 360 degrees, divide it by 3. That gives you each sector being approximately 120 degrees. Again, these are just guides to show a general area. Of course, cell phone signals doesn't end always at that 120, right? It may
Like be dropping every call, I guess.
Right. It's not a hard line painted on the concrete where it says at this point you're going to this other tower or sector. But in a general methodology, we see the 120 degrees sector to be the most common use. And again, that sector in real life could be 118 degrees or 122 degrees, but 120 seems to be the most common approved and used methodology.
How about also, in reality, do you know, and if you don't know, just say that's not part of your training. Can the sectors be slightly to the right, slightly to the left, long way to the left? So you're not really getting it in that perfect, I don't know if this is the right word, but Y. Do you know what I mean by the Y shape?
Yeah, the V kind of shaped part.
Yeah, with the line coming down.
Yeah, so yes, that's true. So we drive test towers in cases where we need to, and that is taking out equipment that was recommended by the cell phone companies themselves. And we can see the actual footprint of what the tower is. That is an extremely time-consuming technique, and it's used in some cases, but also not in others, because if we're just looking at general movements of a device, I don't need to say, hey, this sector ends exactly at this spot versus this spot 10 yards away. If I'm just talking in generalities, which is what most of our testimonies is. But yes, the way an antenna works is the power goes out the middle of the antenna. So we get an azimuth direction, basically a compass heading out of 360 degrees. It may say sector 2 is pointed toward 120 degrees. Well, that's the middle of that sector. Now, if you think of the sector as like a flashlight beam, right? I turn on a flashlight at night, it is most concentrated in the middle, but I have usable light to the left and to the right of the middle. And that's kind of the way the RF energy is. So in the middle is where we get the most concentrated. But as it gets to the edges of that 120 degrees, we get less usable light or RF energy.
How about the, in this case, I presume since you got involved approximately 2022, and that we're talking about in States 5 records from 2015, there was no drive-by to make an analysis of where the actual sectors are. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, we like to do our drive tests, obviously, as close to the incident time as we can.
Sure, otherwise.
Yeah, but we accept in most cases, unless there's a network says, hey, tomorrow we're getting rid of all 4G, we're just going 5G, right? Then anything previous to that would be useless. But we tend to do drive tests upwards of a year and a half away. We try not to push it too much further than that.
Okay. So instead I
Were you finished?
I was, yeah.
Okay. May I continue, sir?
Yes, you may go right ahead.
Could you get from these records in 2015 more like what I would call GPS coordinates, where we're talking about within 4 or 5 feet?
You cannot. No, so there are more advanced records used now. They're called timing advanced records. And that is basically when a phone is checking in with the network, we can see the tower, the sector. We can also see the distance that the phone was away from the tower and sector. But those records are voluminous, like because of that, the providers don't store them very often. Like 30 days is the most any provider will store timing advance records. They don't store any kind of GPS information, nor can a lot of the providers even obtain GPS information.
Did you speak with any, and I know there's several records that you have, and I'm really only focused on states 5.
Okay.
Did you obtain any information on each cell tower that's applicable to your draft report or the original draft report? How many miles of coverage they had in 2015, January 10th?
Yeah, so there's no such record even today.
Even today, you can't do that?
No, so I can't go to the provider and say, hey, I'm really interested in tower 1, 2, 3. Can you tell me how far that goes? And they'll say, no, we can't. We could drive test it. And that's what they say. Hey, why don't you guys, if you want to know the footprint of the tower, why don't you go drive test it? And that's what we do if we have to know the distance of it. There are theoretical models that cell phone providers would use, but those are all proprietary information. And again, it's just scientific information based on, their best guess of what tower and sector coverage is.
So it's not something we can rely on to do over and over again. These are guesses is what I hear. You don't rely on it is what I'm trying to say.
We do not.
Okay.
Nor can we obtain them even if we wanted to.
Do you have any idea? And I don't want you to guess, we're here to qualify you or maybe not qualify you.
Right.
But how far does in 2015 in the cell towers that are used in states 5, and I'm not talking about Miami, I'm focused on the Atlanta towers.
Mhm.
How far, if you have an opinion, and then I'm going to ask you all the questions about how you get to that opinion. I want all the background. How far the cell towers, power, how many miles do they go out? And if you don't know, that's fine. Just say, I'm not sure.
Yeah, so it really depends. And the reason I say that is because you just brought up like Miami, right? So if we're talking a downtown area where people live and work, there's more towers and more sectors because they have to be able to provide more coverage to people. So towers are closer together. And so therefore those coverages are smaller. In rural areas, as we start to get away from downtown Atlanta and we start to move to some other areas, the towers and sectors get farther apart because there's not as many users that they have to provide coverage to. If we think about it like a sprinkler system, right? If we're putting a sprinkler system in our yard, we want everywhere to get water in our yard. We don't want anywhere not to get water. So in order to do that, we have to overlap some of our sprinkler heads. So we might have the sprinkler head on the right, shoot a little bit into the sprinkler head on the left's area. So that way there's coverage everywhere, there's overlap. Well, that is how they build cell phone network architecture. They want to make sure that there's overlap between adjacent towers or sprinkler heads. So that way, when we drive down 85, we don't drop a call every time you go from tower to tower. It hands you off in between. So I talk about that to go back to the distance between the towers. Again, it depends. Like if towers are closer together, the coverage area could be a half mile to, a mile total coverage area that it could cover. In more rural areas, that could get upwards of 5, 6 miles in a really rural area.
Do you have on your oath, so I know you're under oath, what is the coverage area in Atlanta in the 2015 January 10th towers we're talking about? And if you don't know, I'm not trying to trick you. If you don't know, say, I don't know.
Yeah, so again, we don't know without drive testing what the specific coverage area is, but I've done a lot of this. Obviously, I cover all the Amber Alerts. I look at records every single day and find people using it. So in my training and experience, I can estimate, but I don't know specifically what the range is unless I drive test it.
Okay. And were you doing this in 2015 where you were analyzing the records? Or did you start in 2019?
So I started analyzing records in 2015 for the FBI. I'd done it previously in the Army, but in 2015, I was working for the FBI, and that's when I started analyzing records. I became certified, CAS certification in 2016.
Okay. How about the tower's working condition, repairs, things like that? Do you have any idea on States 5, what conditions those towers were in?
Well, we know the ones that were used were operating because obviously they were annotated in the records and used by the device. Now, as far as towers and sectors going down, during our training, we go to switching stations, which a group of towers is called a switch. And so we go to various switching stations and meet with the managers there. And their job, they tell us, is to, obviously provide coverage to as many customers. And if they have a tower and sector that goes down, it's an emergency and, has to be fixed immediately, unless like a hurricane comes in and takes towers out or something. But for the most part, towers and sectors don't go down very often. But really the biggest thing is we know what towers and sectors were used because those were used in the records, and therefore we know those were operating.
Okay. I want to thank you so much for what you do for everybody.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Any further examination? All right. At this point, may we excuse Agent Barini for the purposes of the motion?
Yes, if the court is going to qualify him as an expert.
All right, given the court's testimony, given the testimony the court's heard at this point in time, the court will qualify Agent Barini as an expert in historical call, cell data analysis, and cellular technology.
Thank you, Your Honor. Yes, Mr.
All right,
Vernon can be excused.
Agent Barini, we're going to go ahead and excuse you at this point in time. Appreciate your patience with us. Don't discuss your testimony with anybody except the attorneys in this case, okay?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
All right.
Excuse me, Your Honor, could we have a brief bathroom break?
I knew you were going to ask that. Just wait. I was just seeing how long you could hold out for. All right. We're going to take 10 minutes. We're in recess.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All the time is it? I'm making a call from what he said. It's over. I like that on phone right now. Okay. Well, look, you don't. You want me to pass out all this? Okay. Yeah, right. Yeah.
North, North.
And Miss North, no, Miss Camp, sorry.
That's okay.
Apologize. Where are you currently employed?
I am a school teacher.
Okay, how long have you been a school teacher?
This year is my first.
Okay, and prior to deciding to go teach our children, where did you work?
I worked for the Georgia Bureau of Investigation in the Division of Forensic Sciences as a firearms and tool marks examiner. I was there for about 6 years.
Okay. And if you can tell the court about your education and training, starting with where you went to college.
I have a bachelor's degree in biology from the University of Georgia. When I was hired with GBI, I underwent a 17-month training program that covered ammunition manufacturing and development, firearms manufacturing and development, muzzle to target distance determination, serial number restoration, and the majority of my time was spent on the comparison microscope, comparing bullets to bullets and cartridge cases to cartridge cases to determine if they were fired from the same firearm. In addition to that, I have toured various manufacturing plants where they make the firearms. I've toured plants where they make the tools that then go off to the manufacturers of firearms. And I have successfully completed armorers courses with Glock, FN, Smith & Wesson, and Springfield. And I was a active member with the Association of Firearms Toolmark Examiners.
And have you completed the armorer's course for Fabrique Nationale?
Yes, that was FN that I mentioned earlier.
Okay, and Smith & Wesson.
Yes.
Okay. And you just talked briefly about the training that you receive at GBI. What does that GBI training consist of? I know you said it's about 17 months. What do you learn, and what are you actually being trained on specifically?
Basically from the ground up with firearms and ammunition. So the history of the different firearms and how they're made and where these marks are coming from that we're actually looking at on the microscope. The majority of that time was spent on that comparison microscope, which is a compound microscope for where I look through the oculars. I can see what's on the left stage and the right stage at the same time. So the training also consists of testing, and at the end there is a competency test and a mock trial.
Okay. And did you pass your competency exam?
Yes.
And did you successfully complete your mock trial?
Yes.
After completing your competency testing in the mock trial, is there any supervisory case period in which you have someone supervise your casework?
Yes, so once training is completed, there is a period of supervised casework. Mine was about 6.5 months. So I worked cases, but I worked directly under the supervision of the technical leader at the time.
And I know we spoke about some of your armor course certification. Have you had any additional training outside of the GBI while you were working at the GBI?
Yes, so I attended the Association of Firearms and Toolmarks Examiners, a couple of meetings with them, and then also continued to tour manufacturing facilities for firearms, in addition to the armorers courses as well.
Have you given any presentation on firearms or firearms analysis?
Yes, I have.
And what type of presentations have you given?
I have given discipline meeting presentations regarding cleaning methods to clean bullets to be able to see the markings, and teardrop apertures. So that comes into play when we're looking to determine what type of gun fired cartridge cases. Additionally, I have given a presentation at GIPSTIC to train new officers and agents in what services the GBI provides for firearms analysis.
Okay. And have you had the occasion to train or mentor others in firearms and toolmarks?
Yes, I did oversee in the GBI. I worked with the technical leader to oversee the training of determined type weapon, which was, again, looking at bullets and looking at cartridge cases and determining what type of weapon fired them. So I trained examiners, I believe about 20 trainees under me on that, in addition to revolvers. I oversaw the revolvers with the technical leader as well. And I did supervise casework for, I believe, 3 or 4 scientists.
And have you ever been published in any articles regarding firearms analysis?
No, I have not.
Have you done or read any research regarding firearms?
Yes.
Okay. Tell us about that.
The Association of Firearms and Toolmarks Examiners maintains a journal, an AFTI journal. So all of the members receive the up-to-date research multiple times a year. In addition to that, they keep a database as well. So that has always been a solid resource for me.
And I apologize, I know what GIPSTIC is. You said GIPSTIC earlier. What is GIPSTIC?
My mind is blanking at the moment for what it stands for. It is the Georgia
Peace officer training.
Right. It's where they go get trained police officers.
While you were working with the GBI, approximately how many cases have you analyzed dealing with firearms?
I didn't track that, but based on yearly averages, probably about 400 or 500 cases.
And have you ever been qualified to testify in the state of Georgia or in the federal courts in the area of firearms examination or any other area dealing with firearms?
Yes, I have.
About how many times?
38 in the state of Georgia, and no, I apologize, 39 in the state of Georgia and 1 for federal court, still in the state of Georgia, but in a federal court.
And do you have a CV or resume?
Yes, I do.
You good? May I approach, Your Honor?
You may not.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to show you what the mark is State's Exhibit number 8. Do you recognize State's Exhibit number 8?
Yes, I do.
How do you recognize State's Exhibit number 8?
This is a copy of my CV.
And does your CV accurately reflect the information that we just discussed a few moments ago?
Yes, it does.
All right. And is that a fair, accurate representation of your CV or your resume?
Yes.
Your Honor, this time the state would like to tender State's Exhibit number 8 into evidence.
Any objection? All right, state submitted for purpose of motion.
Thank you. Is the GBI an accredited crime lab?
It is.
Okay. And do you know, are you aware what organization is responsible for accrediting the GBI crime lab?
It is accredited under ANAB, which stands for the ANSI National Accreditation Board. And it also follows ISO 17025 standards, which are international standards.
And does the GBI have policies and standards that firearm scientists and examiners have to utilize when doing firearms training?
Yes, they do.
And are those policies codified? Either like in an online portal or a book?
Yes, they are.
Okay. And prior to being able to test firearms evidence, do scientists or firearms examiner have to know those policies and procedures?
Absolutely.
As a firearms examiner, what are some of your job duties and responsibilities?
They vary case to case depending on what is needed in each case, but typically we are looking at bullets from autopsies and cartridge cases found on the scene to determine if they're fired from the same firearm. When no firearm is submitted, we look at something called class characteristics, which I can describe later, that will tell us information about the type of gun that fired it so that we can therefore generate a report on what it is consistent with being fired from. When a gun is submitted with the evidence, we will create test fires of that firearm and compare them microscopically to see if that was the gun that was used in the incident. Additionally, we can do serial number restorations. We can do muzzle to target distance determinations, which is just determining how far away the firearm is from a target at the time that it was fired. And yes, that is basically what we'll do, and we'll generate reports and we do verification processes and stuff like that.
Okay. As it relates to a few cases for which you're here for, a few case numbers 22-1007-212, 22-1008-698, and 2023-1001-777. Were you asked to do any testing as it relates to firearms?
Yes, I was.
Okay. And what type of testing were you asked to do?
I apologize. I would need to look at a copy of my report.
Yeah, I mean, approach.
You may.
Yes. I'm going to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 9, 10, 11, and 12. Take a few moments and just review those.
Yes.
And looking at State's Exhibit 9, 10, 11, and 12, are you familiar with what I provided to you?
Yes, I am.
And what did I hand you?
Copies of my official reports.
Okay. And looking at State's Exhibit 9, 10, 11, and 12, are those a fair and accurate copy of the reports that you generated in the case numbers that I just referenced?
Yes, they are.
Your Honor, for the purpose of this hearing, the state would like to send a State Exhibit 9, 10, 11, and 12.
No objection to that, Mr. Williams.
All right, any further objection on states 9, 10, 11, and 12? Hearing none, they're admitted for purposes of this hearing.
Okay. So I'm going to ask very generally, as it relates to State Exhibit 9, 10, 11, and 12, what were you asked what was requested of the GBI?
So for States Exhibit 9 and 10, I was given two 40 caliber bullets, and I was asked to compare them and determine if they were fired from the same firearm.
Okay. And as it relates to State Exhibit number 11 and 12,
Yes, so I was given 11 5.7 by 28 millimeter cartridge cases, and I was asked to compare them to a FN 5.7 pistol.
okay. And looking at State Exhibit 9 and 10 and 11 and 12, do they appear to be duplicative of, first, let me start with 9 and 10. Do 9 and 10 appear to be duplicative of one another?
They do.
Okay. And then looking at 11 and 12, do they appear to be duplicative of one another?
They also do, yes.
Okay. And if you can recall, or if you need to look at both, were you asked to do the same comparisons by two separate agencies?
So for 9 and 10, this was the Atlanta Police Department and the Fulton County Medical Examiner that submitted the evidence. For 11 and 12, it's the Fulton County District Attorney's Office.
And does that appear to all be the same evidence that was all submitted in all four of the all four of the GBI reports?
I apologize. Can you repeat the question?
Sure. Let me bring it. For 9 and 10, does that appear to be the same evidence that was compared?
Yes, it was. And that is very typical. When two cases are related, there will be two reports generated that are typically identical.
Okay. And then the same for 11 and 12?
Yes.
Now, generally, if you can explain to the court, how do you, when you're given items to compare, such as a bullet and a firearm, if you can walk the court through the process of what you do when you get, say, just a cartridge case or a bullet and a firearm?
Okay, so I'll start with describing a cartridge, if that's okay.
Yes.
A cartridge is a single unit of unfired ammunition consisting of 4 major parts. It is unfired, so the bullet is seated inside of a cartridge case. Inside of the cartridge case is gunpowder, and at the top of the cartridge case is a primer. So when a firearm is fired, a firing pin will strike the primer, causing a spark, igniting the gunpowder within the cartridge case, building pressure to send the bullet down the barrel. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So the cartridge case itself is slammed up against the back of the breech face of the firearm under high pressure as well. So in this metal on metal interaction, the softer metal of the ammunition is picking up marks from the firearm that fired it. So that is what I'm looking at when I do these comparisons. I look at 2 major types of characteristics. I'll look at class characteristics, and then I'll look at individual characteristics. Class characteristics are very general characteristics. How is the bullet rifled? How many lands and grooves are there? What direction is it twisting? The shape of the firing pin, location of extractor and ejector. They're very general characteristics that a group of firearms of the same model are going to share. Individual characteristics is the other type of characteristic that I'm looking at. Those are picked up from random microscopic imperfections that happen during the manufacturing process of that firearm. So those are what will tell me what specific firearm fired it if I have a firearm to compare them to.
Okay. And specifically, looking at State's Exhibit number 9. what was requested of the GBI?
I had two 40 caliber bullets that I compared to each other to determine if they were fired from the same firearm.
Okay. And once you did your comparison, or were you able to compare those two bullets?
Yes, I was.
Okay. And once you compare those bullets, what's the next step after your comparison?
When I'm finished with my comparison, I will then give it to a second qualified examiner and they will do their own independent comparison. That is called the verification process. So every microscopic comparison goes through two examiners. We will confirm that our answers were the same, and they were. So at that point, a report is written. And so I will write my own report. I'll have a case file I'll put together with my notes and report and everything. And when I go to draft it, a third qualified examiner will then peer review the case file digitally. So they will then make sure that all the policies were followed, and according to everything they see in the case file, they agree with all of the decisions that were made.
Okay. And in order to do your initial comparison, when you get those two bullets, what would you do?
I would first determine the caliber of the bullets, and then I would determine what class characteristics each one has. How many lands and grooves were there, so forth. And then if they agree, if their class characteristics agree, then I'll microscopically compare them for their individual characteristics to determine if they were fired from the same firearm.
Now looking at states exhibits 11 and 12, but they're duplicates, what were you asked to do with the items submitted in states exhibit 11 and 12?
I was asked to determine if 11 cartridge cases were fired from a FN pistol.
Okay. And how would you go about doing that testing?
I would first analyze the cartridge cases and determine the class. If the class agrees with the pistol, then I would then move forward with the individual characteristics to determine if that was the pistol that fired them.
Okay. And once you determine whether or not they had the same class, and then determine if you had to compare with a firearm, would it then go through that verification and peer review stage as the other testing would have went through?
Yes.
Now, the technique or the comparison technique that you've just explained about, how long has that technique been in existence?
The comparison microscope was invented by Calvin Goddard and Philip Gravel around 1925.
And to your knowledge, do other crime labs use the microscopic telescope?
Yes, they do.
And has this technique itself been subject to peer review and publication?
Yes, it has.
And has there been ongoing research regarding this area or this technique?
Yes.
And does this technique enjoy general acceptance within the scientific community?
Yes, it does.
And again, with both States Exhibit 9 and really States Exhibit 11, did you follow the same procedures that we just discussed?
Yes, I did.
And were all, in both 9 and 11, were they both verified and then peer reviewed?
They were.
All right. And did you get a result for your testing?
Yes, I did.
And is that published in those reports, States Exhibit 9, 10, 11, and 12?
It is.
Your Honor, this time the state will move to tender Ms. Angela
Camp.
as an expert in firearms and two-mark examination and analysis based on her experience, qualifications, and the reliability of the science and how it was applied in this case.
All right, any voir dire of Ms. Camp? You were formerly known as Ms. North, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, all right, I want to make sure, okay. All right, anything?
Just very brief.
All right.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
When you mentioned what you call peer review,
Yes.
is that a coworker of yours who is looking over your work?
Yes.
And when you said that they look at the digital file, are they looking at the evidence that was submitted to the GBI for testing or just your reports?
They will look at the case file.
If you know.
Yes, the case file includes photos of the packages when they initially came into the GBI. Then they also include photos that I take during my analysis. So the peer reviewer is assigned to look at all of it.
And under the microscope to see the lands and grooves to do the comparison, or do you know?
The verifier will do that. The peer reviewer will only look at the photos that I did take microscopically.
Okay, let's just start with the photographs. Are they able, that quote peer reviewer, are they able to ascertain whether your work is correct, or they're just looking to see that you took the photograph, if you know?
Oh, they do look to make sure that they agree that what they see is a representation of an identification or elimination, depending on what was called. Yes.
How about the verifier? Who is that in the process?
That is the second examiner that will look at all of the evidence themselves under the microscope once the primary examiner is finished. So they take every microscopic comparison and they'll go look at it and form their own conclusions. And then the verifier will compare their conclusions with the primary. And if they're not the same, the case is inconclusive. And if they did come to the same conclusions, then it moves on to the process.
Thank you so much. Your Honor, thank you.
Anybody else? All right, hearing none, the court will, based upon what's been presented thus far, designate Ms. Angela Camp, formerly known as Ms. Angela North, as an expert in the area of firearms examination. Anything else?
No.
All right, may we temporarily excuse Ms. Camp for the purposes of the motion?
Yes.
All right, Madam, I'm going to go ahead and excuse you for the purpose of the motion. Thank you for your patience with us. Don't discuss your testimony with anybody except the attorneys in this case, okay?
Yes.
All right, thank you, Madam. All right, Ms. Hilton, the time being almost noon, might be appropriate to take lunch as the court has some unrelated business I need to take up during the lunchtime hour. So I'm going to recess and ask that everybody come back at 1:30, and we will recommence, I should say, with your examination. How many of your experts, how many more people do you have, Madam?
Your Honor, I have 3 left, Your Honor. There is a 4th firearm examiner. Neither the examiner or the verifier, because we were trying to bring the verifier here, are available. So we would ask, this is testimony that if they could come in right before or right during trial. It's a firearms examiner, so the science is a science that is not unknown, that is a science that has been utilized for years. It would be similar to this testimony here, as both the firearms examiner and the verifier work for the FBI. And so we believe it would be a determination of qualifications versus the science itself. And so we would just ask if that individual, which would either be Zachary Weitzel or Kyle Willis, to just, if we have to have the diver, be right before they testify.
I'm okay with that as a court, but I would ask that you do that at least 2 weeks prior so that I could potentially get them in to testify, because as you know, we take up 30, 40 minutes just doing somebody that's not of any consequence, or it's there's not going to be too much contest about that particular witness. But so I'd like to do that maybe at a time period that I don't have our jury here. I've excused them and we can take up that and other ancillary business. So 2 weeks prior, okay?
Yes, Your Honor.
Related to that, I'm going to ask you have you all sent my administrative order to your witnesses as of yet?
We have,
Email, okay. I would ask that you email anybody that you have that you're going to go ahead and, because your subpoena is only good for a term, as you all know. So, but I need you to put everybody else on notice that it's me telling you, don't put yourself in a position of going on vacation or whatever else, that, we will, that I will have told everybody they need to make themselves available. Okay.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. All right. Okay. Then I'll see everybody back at 1:30. Okay. We'll be in recess until that time.
Thank you, sir.
All right.
and we'll do tool mark analysis, which, like firearms, is linking markings left to a particular tool or what type of tool if no tool is submitted.
Now, for the case in which you are here for today, which is DOFS case number 2022-1007212, were you asked to do some testing in that case?
Yes, I was.
And what were you asked to do?
I was asked to do a serial number restoration.
What is serial number restoration?
So in the event that a serial number on a firearm, since as a result of the 1968 Gun Control Act, firearms intended to be distributed or sold need to have a serial number. If one is obliterated, we attempt to restore it so that we can read any potential characters that may have been lost as a result of tampering with the serial number.
Can you explain to the court, how would you go about determining if a serial number has been obliterated? How do you restore it?
Sure. So the basic process of a serial number restoration is there's three main steps. The first is a visual examination. We'll look at the firearm and determine if a serial number restoration is necessary, right? So we'll look and see if we can actually read the serial number. We can compare what we see to, we have a serial number structure guides, which are compiled by the ATF. And we can compare what we see to what the structure guides recommend from the ATF and make sure that everything's consistent. If we determine that a serial number needs to be restored, the next step would be a physical restoration. Essentially, that is, we're applying either sanding or grinding away at the upper levels of the serial number. Typically, in many cases with serial number obliterations, it's not actually a complete obliteration. So while the serial number appears to be destroyed, if you can sand away the upper levels of the destroyed sections, you can actually recover the serial number with just physical methods. Following that, we can move into chemical restoration, which typically employs like acid etching techniques in order to bring back the serial number that way.
Okay. And at what point do you determine which type of restoration you need to do, physical or chemical?
So you'll always do a physical if one is necessary. Like basically, if it doesn't pass a visual examination and you determine that any restoration is needed, you'll always do some level of physical restoration, even if it's just to basically get a nice starting ground for your chemical applications.
And if you have to do a chemical application, what are the steps in a chemical application?
So we traditionally use acid etching. And so you'll be applying, depending on the composition of the metal that you're attempting to restore a serial number, you'll determine that based off what is reacting with it. So we have a variety of different acids. You'll determine what type of acid you need to use. You'll apply it to the serial number, and then you'll occasionally either dilute it or neutralize it at various steps, because essentially you're just trying to see when you can actually visualize the serial numbers again.
Now, after you complete your analysis and you determine whether it's just a visual examination or you have to do either a physical or chemical restoration, what happens after that?
So we have a verification and peer review processes. For serial number restoration, verification actually happens at the same time as primary analysis. When you're doing chemical restorations, what will happen is sometimes you will get the numbers very briefly back, but you could potentially lose them again because the acid is still eating away at the metal. So verifications happen on the spot. And then following verification, where a second trained examiner has looked at the same serial number that you're looking at and determined that you're in agreement on what you're seeing, the alphanumeric characters, you will then publish your findings in the report, and that report is subjected to our peer review process, where a third trained examiner looks at all your documentation and ensures that the conclusions in the report are consistent with the documentation provided.
Okay. And this technique that you use, doing first the visual, then having a verification, a peer review stage, strike that. When it comes to the visual, physical, and chemical restoration, about how long has that technique been in existence?
So the concept of acid etching with metal has been around for hundreds of years. As far as applying the chemical restoration techniques to serial number restoration, I'm familiar with some recommendations for like one of the reagents we use, Fry's reagent, back from the 1940s. And I've seen literature from like the 70s. So, mid 1900s.
Do you know, or to your knowledge, do other crime labs across the country use this technique?
Yes, they do.
And has this technique itself been subject to peer review and publication?
Yes.
And has there been any ongoing research regarding this particular technique?
Yes.
And does this technique enjoy general acceptance within the scientific community?
It does.
All right. As it relates to this case number 2022-1007-212, were you able to do, or did you do serial number restoration on this particular weapon?
So I did complete the serial number restoration service. The only step in the process that was required was the visual examination in this instance.
Why was that?
Because when I examined the firearm and the serial number underneath my microscope, just using lighting alone, I was able to determine the entire serial number.
Were there any, maybe not obliterations, but was there any, lack of a better term, damage to the weapon where the serial number was?
So there were scratches present on the frame plate of the firearm where the serial number was.
And did you conduct that visual testing in the same manner that we just discussed earlier today?
Yes, I did.
And did it go through a verification and peer review process as well?
Yes, it did.
All right. And were those findings published in a report?
They were.
Wasn't marked as Stacy Exhibit number 14. Do you recognize 14, Stacy Exhibit 14?
Yes, I do.
Then how do you recognize Stacy Exhibit 14?
This appears to be my report that I released on this case.
And does it appear to be a fair and accurate depiction of your report that you released in this case?
Yes, it does.
Your Honor, for the purpose of this hearing, the state would like to tender Stacy Exhibit number 14 into evidence.
On behalf of Ms. Stewart, for today's hearing.
All right, Stacy 14.
Your Honor, this time the state would like to tender Mr. Ardell as an expert in firearms and two-mark examination and analysis based on.
In just one moment, an accident can change your life. You only have one opportunity to receive the justice you deserve. That's why choosing the right lawyer is so important. You need an aggressive, experienced lawyer who's willing to go to court and fight for your rights. I'm Armando Pius. If you've been injured in an accident or suffered from medical malpractice, call Pius, Pius & Pius at 407-888-8888 or visit piuslaw.com. Let my family serve your family.
Ms. Cooper Jackson, good afternoon, madam. You can please approach the witness stand. Once you get there, if you would turn and face Deputy Ingram and be sworn as a witness before you sit down. Thank you, madam.
Raise your right hand. You swear firm testimony you give today the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth.
I do.
Have a seat. State and spell your first and last name for the course into the mic right there.
Sure. Rebecca Cooper Jackson, REBECCA, Cooper, COOPER, Jackson, JACKSON.
And good afternoon, Ms. Cooper Jackson. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Where are you currently employed?
Currently, I work for the Atlanta Police Department Crime Lab.
And what do you do with the Atlanta Police Department Crime Lab?
I am a latent print examiner.
And how long have you been at the APD Crime Lab?
Since 2021.
Okay. What are your job duties at the Atlanta Police Department Crime Lab?
I'm responsible for evidence handling, anything that connects to latent print examination.
Okay. You've been at the APD Crime Lab since 2021. Prior to working at APD Crime Lab, did you work anywhere else?
I did. I worked for the GBI.
And what did you do for the GBI?
I was also a latent print examiner there.
And how long did you work at the GBI?
From 2017 to 2019.
Please tell the court about your education, training, and experience.
Sure. I have a degree in biological sciences from Howard University. I also am a graduate of the International Latent Print Training Academy. And I continue training. Recently, I became certified in latent print examination from the International Association for Identification.
And what do you have to do to become certified?
So it's a somewhat rigorous test. It's about 8 hours of both practical and examination questions.
And as a now certified latent print examiner, do you have to have continual education within the field in order to keep up with your certification?
Yes.
Have you done any presentations in the area of latent print examinations?
I have last year to my colleagues at the Crime Lab, I did a presentation on latent print examination verification.
And have you had the occasion to train anyone on latent print examinations?
Yes, currently I have one trainee at the Crime Lab.
As of today, do you know approximately how many latent print impressions have you examined?
Over 1,000. I did about 800 in training alone.
And have you ever been qualified to testify in the state of Georgia in the area of latent print examinations?
Yes.
And have you been called to or qualified under the Dauber standard in the state of Georgia?
Yes.
And in what county?
Fulton here.
And do you recall when that was?
Last year sometime, I'm not sure exactly.
Okay. And do you have a CV or a resume?
Yes.
Permission to approach.
You may.
So this shows you us the mark of Stacy exhibit number 6. Do you recognize Stacy exhibit number 6?
Yes.
How do you recognize Stacy exhibit number 6?
This is my CV.
Okay. And is that a fair and accurate copy of your CV?
It is.
And does that cover generally what we just discussed a few moments ago?
Yes.
You're right. This time the state would like to tender Stacy exhibit number 6 into evidence for the purposes of this hearing.
Any objection to state 6? All right, state 6 for purposes of the motion is admitted.
Now, is the APD, and is that the Atlanta Police Department?
Correct, yes.
Is the APD Crime Lab an accredited crime lab?
It is.
And what organization is responsible for accrediting the APD Crime Lab?
So it's ANAB, it's the American National Accreditation Board.
Okay. And does the APD Crime Lab have policies and standards that latent print examiners at the lab have to follow when doing latent print examination?
Yes.
And prior to being able to conduct latent print examinations, does the latent print examiner have to know those policies and procedures?
Correct.
And what are some of the policies that a latent print examiner must do before, during, and after a latent print examination?
Well, first, there's proper chain of custody just in the evidence that we receive. With regards to the actual evidence and the latent prints presented, we utilize the ACE-V methodology. That's something that all latent print examiners, I would say countrywide use. and basic knowledge on how to utilize the databases. We have 3 databases that we utilize: local, state, and federal. And so essentially, those are things that you would need to know how to do.
Okay. So let's first talk about latent print exam. As a latent print examiner, what are some of your job duties and responsibilities?
So I receive evidence that has been typically submitted by officers with regards to particular incidents, either street crimes or it varies. I receive the evidence, follow the proper chain of custody. I analyze the evidence for latent prints. I determine if the submitted evidence is of value or not. If I determine it is of value, I do a search in one of those databases that I mentioned, and then typically a comparison, evaluation, and then the report.
And when you say you determine that it's of value, is that a part of the analysis phase with the ACE-V?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Just basically, what is a fingerprint?
So a fingerprint would be the friction-rich skin that you find on your fingertips. It's also on your palms and the soles of your feet, and it's unique to every person.
And when is it formed?
It's formed in utero within, I'd say, the first trimester. You first get kind of paddles as hands. Your hands then separate and you have your fingers. And then as the pads on your fingers regress, you see the actual patterns of the fingerprints.
And are fingerprints unique to each person?
Exactly.
Okay. And do fingerprints ever change?
No, barring death or decomposition, your skin, kind of rolls off every month, but what comes back is the exact same fingerprint that you were born with.
Can 2 or more people have the same fingerprint?
No.
Why not?
Because they are formed in utero. There's no way to manipulate that. There's no way to know which pattern is forming in utero. It's happenstance, and we just have no control over it.
What is a latent print?
So a latent print would be an impression that is unintentionally left on a surface. It's essentially all of the oils, residue, dirt, sweat. It's mostly made of water that is on your fingertips. And when you touch a surface, it's a reproduction that you see as to wherever you've touched or an object that you've touched.
Okay. And what is a known print?
So a known print is an intentional reproduction of that friction-rich skin. So if you were interviewing for a job, you may be asked to take fingerprints, or if you were arrested, they would take your fingerprints. But essentially the difference is that you know the source of those fingerprints.
And can you lift fingerprints from every surface?
You can, however, the quality of the fingerprints would definitely not be the same. You'd get a better quality print on a hard, non-porous surface than you would on a textured or porous surface.
When someone needs to lift fingerprints from a surface, what are some important factors to know in order to lift those prints?
Well, for the first thing I would say is the surface that I just discussed. If it's a porous or non-porous, the officer or the crime scene technician would wear gloves so as not to contaminate the lift card. They would use a lift card with dusting powder to lift the prints. If it's on a surface that is porous, they may use chemicals to develop the print so that you could see it more clearly. But essentially, those are 2 basic ways: a physical developer or a chemical developer.
Now, once a case comes into the APD crime lab and you're asked to test for latent prints, tell the court, what do you do once you receive that evidence?
So typically the evidence envelopes are sealed. I typically break the seal at a different area so that we can continue to track the chain of custody. I analyze each lift card submitted for latent prints. Some pop out and are pretty easy to see. Others, I can use a magnifier, or I can use the APHIS system that I mentioned to magnify it. Once I've identified the latent prints on the particular fingerprint cards, I label them. pretty much determine how many, if any, will be searched in the APHIS database, and then I move on from there.
Okay. And we say move on from there, where do you go?
So if I determine, let's say, of 3 lift cards, we have 1 or 2, I would search both the local and state database. Typically, those come back first. Usually it pops about 10 candidates. It can be more, but typically we refer to 10 candidates. I go one by one to determine if the impression that has been submitted is the same as any of the candidates that have come back from this search. If there are no candidates found in that initial search, then I take the impression and I do search it on the FBI as well. And that's the same process, another 10 candidates, and I just basically go back and forth. I'm looking for the same characteristics in the known print that have been submitted in the latent print. And when I feel I have enough in agreement, that's an identification. If that doesn't happen and there is no agreement, then that is would not be an identification. And then sometimes, not often, but sometimes if you have some in agreement and some not, it's inconclusive.
Once you pull some items from APHIS and kind of make that comparison, is that when you do your evaluation and making sure, what do you do in the evaluation step?
So in the last step, the evaluation is exactly that. I'm basically determining that, okay, I believe this to be an identification. And so the evaluation would be saying that it's an identification, it's an exclusion, or it's inconclusive. So that's the evaluation phase.
And after evaluation, what's the next step?
So every single latent print that we've come to a decision on is then verified by another trained and qualified examiner. That is a part of the methodology that I mentioned, the ACE-V. So at that V, the verification stage, the impressions that I just reviewed would then go to another examiner to be basically confirmed that either A, it is an identification, it's not an identification, or C, it's inconclusive.
And is this method that you just described, this ACE-V method, used in all cases in which you're asked to do latent print analysis?
Yes.
And is this method widely accepted within the scientific community?
It is.
And now let's talk about this particular case. An APD case number 22073, 1882, where you asked to perform latent print analysis.
I was.
And who made that request?
That came from my supervisor, and her name is Sandra Tullis.
Okay. And when did you do your analysis here?
I will have to check the dates on that. It's been quite some time. I believe it was in 2021. But let me just look here at the report date. So case received date 3/15/2022.
Okay. And did you do the same method that we just discussed here today?
I did.
And was there a result found?
Yes, in this particular case, I did make an identification.
Okay. And did you place that identification within a report?
Yes.
God bless you. This gave what's been marked as Stacy exhibit number 7. Do you recognize Stacy exhibit number 7?
Yes.
How do you recognize Stacy exhibit number 7?